18 years is a long time to survive in silence. Clara Marowin had learned to wear grief like a second skin, smooth on the outside, but paper-thin and brittle just beneath. Each morning, she awoke with a sense of unfinishedness, as if her soul had been half-stitched to this world and the other half lost in a fog she could never step into. Asheville Public Library had become more than her workplace. It was her ritual, her chapel, her shield. The rhythmic shelving of books, the musty scent of paper, and the familiar creak of floorboards beneath her feet grounded her when everything else had drifted into chaos. Her daughter Ella had been the light in her world, a child who laughed like the world had no walls. Clara still remembered the way Ella's tiny fingers used to reach for her face, the way she called her mama like it was the most sacred word she knew. But one rainy October afternoon changed everything. Clara had been deep in the basement of the library, organizing outdated records, her phone tucked inside her bag where no signal could reach it. She demissed 3 urgent calls from Little Acorn Daycare. By the time she reemerged, it was too late. Police cars were already stationed in front of the daycare, their lights washing over the playground in surreal flashes. The staff were pale, shaken. One officer gently took her aside, his voice soft but final. Ella was gone. The security footage came days later. Morris Pledger, a longtime employee who had always been kind to the children, had taken Ella by the hand, looked around nervously, then slipped out the gate to a waiting car. Clara watched that clip over and over until it was etched into her retinas. Her husband David tried to be strong, tried to grieve alongside her, but he mourned differently. His grief became resentment. Their marriage unraveled quietly, no screaming, no accusations, just silence until one day he packed a bag and didn't come back. Clara never blamed him, not truly. They had both lost their center. But while he needed to escape, she needed to remain. What if Ella returned? What if she remembered the path back home? Clara kept her room exactly as it was. Stuffed animals lined the bed, a mobile still hung above the crib, and the walls bore hand-painted lilies from happier days. The years blurred. Holidays passed with hollow rituals. Birthdays were marked by candles Clara lit alone. She learned to function, to smile when necessary, to nod at conversations she couldn't hear. Only Sarah, her closest co-worker at the library, ever dared to ask about Ella, and always gently. Clara lived for patterns, morning coffee at 7, 10, reshelving returns at 9, 0, cataloging acquisitions at noon. It kept her sane, until the day it didn't. She had been unboxing the latest shipment of magazines, a task she normally found mundane when the cover of Vogue arrested her completely. There she was, a girl standing in the sunlight, wearing denim overalls and a scarlet off-the-shoulder blouse. Her expression was calm, radiant. Her posture was effortless. But it wasn't her face that stole Clara's breath, it was the birthmark. A soft violet patch, lotus-shaped, resting near the corner of her left eye. It was not similar, it was identical. Clara felt her knees give out. Her hand flew to her mouth as a sharp sob escaped her. It had been 18 years since she had last seen that mark, and yet every night she had dreamed of it, traced it in her mind, remembered the way baby Ella would reach up and touch it like it was a star that belonged to her. The name printed beneath the model's photograph read, Emmy Wells, 20 years old. The feature article said the photos had been taken on a farm in rural Appalachia. Clara stared at it for long minutes, her heart hammering so loud she was sure the whole library could hear it. She flipped through the pages in desperation, scanning every image, reading every caption. There were more photos, one with Emmy kneeling among rows of tomatoes, another laughing with goats, one more caught in a moment of concentration as she stacked wooden crates. The lighting changed, but the mark remained, the same gentle, violet blossom. Clara didn't finish her shift. She left the library without telling anyone and drove straight to the police station, clutching the magazine like it was a sacred artifact. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she replayed old memories. The last hug, the last time she tucked Ella into bed, the sound of her daughter's tiny giggle. At the station, she demanded to see Detective Gary Holden. He had aged in the intervening years, gray now with heavier eyes, but he remembered Clara. And when she laid the magazine on his desk and pointed at the birthmark, he didn't dismiss her. He studied it with grim focus. "It's not just similar," he admitted. "It's exact." A phone call to the Vogue editorial office led them to the photographer, Leah Dalton, who confirmed that Emmy had been discovered serendipitously while photographing family farms. Clara listened, fingers trembling as Leah described Emmy's presence, her quiet demeanor, her natural grace. When asked about contact information, the magazine only had the name of the farm, Kessler Farm. Clara insisted they go immediately. Holden organized a visit, and within hours, Clara found herself driving behind a police cruiser, heart in her throat. The road to the farm twisted through mist-covered hills and crumbling fence lines. It had been 18 years since she had last seen her daughter. What if this was another dead end? What if the girl had no memory of her? What if, after everything, Clara was just a stranger to her own child? But hope, even fragile and bruised, kept her moving forward. Because one thing Clara knew deep in her soul: a mother doesn't forget her child. And she had never stopped listening for Ella's voice. She had never stopped watching the crowd for her daughter's face. And now, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the search had a name. A face. A direction. The sun dipped low as they neared the destination. Clara's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The final chapter was beginning, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for how it might end. Clara barely remembered the drive to the police station. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and her heart thudded in her ears like a war drum. She clutched the magazine so tightly that its glossy corners curled beneath her fingers. Detective Gary Holden had been the one constant in her case, the only officer who hadn't let the file turn cold without a fight. He was older now, grayer with deeper lines along his brow. But when he saw Clara enter the precinct, he stood up instantly, recognition flashing in his tired eyes. She didn't need to say anything. The way she placed the magazine on his desk, the way she pointed at the cover, the tremor in her lips, it all said enough. He studied the image, flipping to the editorial pages, his lips tightening as he paused on the photograph of the young woman looking over her shoulder in the sunlight. And then his gaze rose slowly to meet hers. Clara, this might actually be something. That single sentence undid the weight of years pressing on her chest. He quickly retrieved Ella's case file, pulling out the childhood photos, the original flyers, the composite sketches. They compared birthmarks, bone structure, the subtle curve of the left eyebrow. It all matched. The photographer, Leah Dalton, was reachable by phone and confirmed she had taken the images just weeks earlier on a spontaneous shoot at a small farm called Kessler Farm in rural Appalachia. The girl's name, as far as she knew, was Emmy Wells, not a professional model, just a farmhand who'd caught her eye. Leah didn't know anything beyond the name of the farm, no address, no phone number, but she could describe the location. Detective Holden took notes and placed calls to Vogue's editorial office to secure legal cooperation. Within hours, they tracked down contact information for the Kessler family and arranged a visit. Clara insisted on going with them. "I've waited 18 years," she said. "I'm not staying behind now." The drive through Appalachia was long and winding. The autumn landscape blurred past in burnt golds and dusky reds. Clara sat silently in the passenger seat of a police cruiser, magazine in her lap, heart caught between anticipation and fear. When they arrived, the Kessler farm looked idyllic, almost too perfect. A white farmhouse with green shutters, fields stretching toward the horizon, and tidy barns lined in rows. But the beauty did little to soothe the electric tension building in her chest. John and Miriam Kessler greeted them with a practiced warmth that felt just shy of genuine. When asked about Emmy Wells, they exchanged a brief glance before Miriam answered, "She's not with us anymore. Just helped out that day. Labor rotation, you know." John added, "Rowan sent her. He's a labor coordinator from up north. We don't have his address, just a number." That number, when dialed, was dead. No voicemail, no ring. Just a cold silence that pressed against the walls of Clara's ribcage like a warning. Detective Holden said they'd try other methods to trace Rowan, but it might take time. Clara refused to leave the area. She found a modest roadside motel called Pine Ridge and paid in cash. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered across the road to the only spot still lit, Miller's Tavern. It had the feel of an old-world watering hole, full of locals who nodded at each other like clockwork. The walls were adorned with farm equipment, and the scent of wood smoke and fried food lingered in the air. Clara took a seat at the bar and ordered club soda, hoping for a moment of stillness. That's when she met Bran. He was polite, friendly, with a calm presence and a bartender's intuition for reading people. "Not from around here, are you?" he asked with a half-smile. Clara nodded, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm looking for someone," she said, then hesitated, but Bran's face was open, honest. "My daughter. She went missing 18 years ago." Bran's smile faded. "I'm sorry, that's awful." Clara continued, her voice low. "I think I may have found her in a magazine. Photos were taken at the Kessler farm." Bran nodded slowly. They don't come in here much, private folks. Keep to themselves. Clara opened her mouth to say more, but Bran interrupted gently. My mom used to work at a daycare in Asheville before she passed away. The sentence hit Clara like a sledgehammer. She stared at him, her voice suddenly thin. What was her name? Morris, he said. Morris Pledger. Clara's stomach dropped, her breath caught in her throat. Morris Pledger was the woman who took Ella. The woman whose face haunted her every dream. The woman they'd found hanging in Pisgah Forest. Clara did her best to stay composed. I knew your mother, she said softly. She was involved in my daughter's disappearance. Bran blinked, stunned. No, that can't be. My dad always said she died because of debt collectors, that she paid off a debt and they killed her. Clara shook her head. The police believed she took my daughter to pay off a gambling debt. They ruled it suicide, but Bran stood motionless, hands trembling slightly. My dad's name is Rowan, he said, as if realizing the implications all at once. Clara stared. Rowan, he's the labor coordinator the Kesslers mentioned. Bran nodded slowly. I can take you to him. He lives nearby, a small farm 20 minutes from here. The pieces were falling into place too quickly. Clara felt dizzy, as though the floor beneath her had vanished. Still, she knew this was her chance. She had to go. She had to see it through. Let me follow you, she said. I have Ella's things in my car in case. She didn't finish the sentence. Bran didn't need her to. They left immediately. Bran led the way in his pickup, and Clara followed in her aging Honda, heart slamming against her chest. The night was dark and quiet, the roads barely illuminated by flickering street lamps. The landscape grew more wooded, the terrain more uneven. They turned onto a gravel path marked only by a mailbox with faded paint. As they approached the farmhouse, another car was pulling out of the driveway. Bran tensed. That's him, he said. That's my dad. They gave chase, keeping a careful distance until Rowan turned onto another hidden drive. The house was smaller than the Kesslers, humble but tidy, with outbuildings and livestock in the shadows. Rowan exited his car and froze when he saw Bran and Clara approaching. Bran, what the hell are you doing here? His eyes flicked to Clara. Who's this? Bran didn't answer at first. This is Clara Marowyn. Her daughter was taken from daycare 18 years ago. Mom took her. Rowan's face tightened. That's not true. Your mother never. She did, Bran cut in. We've seen the footage, the birthmark, the magazine. Rowan's composure slipped. Then Clara spoke. I'm not here to blame. I'm here to find my daughter. Rowan opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a voice called from the porch. Rowan, what's going on? A young woman stepped into view, and Clara felt the breath leave her lungs. There, in the pale yellow porch light, stood a girl with honey-colored hair, gentle eyes, and the birthmark. That unmistakable violet blossom on her left cheekbone. Clara didn't need confirmation. She knew every fiber of her being recognized the child she had lost. My God, she whispered, it's you. Emmy looked confused, then wary. Who are you? She asked. Clara stepped forward slowly. My name is Clara Marowyn. I believe I'm your mother. The silence was deafening. Rowan stepped between them, voice tight. This woman has no proof. She's mistaken. But Emmy didn't look at him. She looked at Clara, then at Bran, then back at Clara. Clara reached into her purse, hands shaking, and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a toddler with soft curls and the same birthmark. You were taken when you were nearly 2 years old, from your daycare in Asheville. Emmy stared at the photo, her mouth parting slightly. That's me. Rowan tried to pull her back, but Bran blocked him. Tell the truth, Dad, he demanded. Rowan looked between them all, then lowered his gaze. They paid me, he said. The Kesslers, they said they wanted a child but couldn't adopt legally. I owed people money. Your mother agreed to deliver the child. So they bought me? Emmy asked, voice hollow. Rowan nodded slowly. Yes. Emmy wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. Everything I know, it's a lie. Just then, sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights washed over the farmhouse. Clara looked at Emmy, her eyes filling with tears. It's okay. You're safe now. Emmy stood frozen, but then she did something unexpected. She stepped toward Clara. I don't know who I am anymore, she said, but I want to find out. And in that moment, Clara knew. The journey was far from over, but they had finally found their way back to each other. Bran had barely spoken a word during the ride. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his eyes locked forward, lips pressed into a grim line. Clara followed in her car, her heart pounding so violently it felt like it might break through her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, imagined knocking on a strange door, seeing a girl with eyes like hers and David's. whispering the name Ella just to see if the air shifted. But now that she was actually driving toward Rowan Pledger's secluded farm in the Appalachian Hills, all she could feel was dread. What if the girl was Ella? What if she had the birthmark but wasn't her daughter? What if she had moved on? What if she didn't want to know who she really was? As they reached the gravel road, Clara saw a sedan pulling out from the property ahead of them. Bran's jaw tensed. "That's him," he muttered into his phone over Bluetooth. Rowan Pledger's car. They followed at a distance, the road narrowing into twists of dirt and shadow. 10 minutes later, the car turned into a clearing, headlights sweeping across an old wooden house with a slanted porch and a few small outbuildings. The property was modest but well kept. As Bran and Clara pulled up, Rowan was just stepping out of his vehicle. He looked older than Clara remembered from the newspaper photos, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same tired eyes as his son. "Bran, what are you doing here?" Rowan's voice was rough with confusion and something else Clara couldn't quite name, annoyance, alarm. His eyes landed on Clara and his expression tightened. "Who's this?" "This is Clara Marowyn," Bran said without hesitation. "Her daughter was kidnapped 18 years ago by Mom." Rowan blinked. "That's ridiculous. Your mother would never—" "We have proof," Clara interrupted. "Surveillance footage, photos. And a birthmark that doesn't lie." "You need to leave," Rowan growled. "This isn't your business anymore." "It's exactly my business," Clara said, voice trembling but firm, "because I think my daughter is here." As the standoff escalated, the front door of the house creaked open, and a young woman stepped onto the porch. She looked about 20 tall, with long, loose brown hair and a sun-kissed face. Clara's breath caught. She could have sworn she was seeing a ghost. The girl's eyes were cautious as she scanned the scene. "Rowan, what's going on?" Rowan turned to block her view, but not quickly enough. The porch light caught her face fully. There it was, the birthmark. Faint but unmistakable, a violet blossom curling around her left eye. Clara's knees almost buckled. "Oh my God," she whispered. The girl stared at her, confused. "Who are you?" "My name is Clara," she said softly. "Clara Marowyn, I believe you're my daughter." The girl frowned. "No, that's not possible. My parents are John and Miriam Kessler." Rowan stepped between them, his posture defensive. "This woman is confused. You don't need to listen to her." "She's not confused," Bran said coldly. "She's right." "What are you talking about?" the girl asked. "Why is everyone acting like they know me?" Clara reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out a small envelope. Inside were photographs. Ella at 1 year old, her first steps, her laughing in the park, the birthmark clearly visible. She handed them over. The girl looked down, slowly flipping through the images. Her hand began to shake. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. These look like me." "They are you," Clara said. "You were taken from your daycare when you were almost 2. The woman who took you, Morris Pledger, was your babysitter, Rowan's wife. Your mother, the one who raised you, wasn't your mother." "No," she said, stepping back. "John and Miriam, they raised me. They loved me." "I'm not saying they didn't," Clara said quickly, "but they weren't your parents. They bought you." "That's a lie," Rowan snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell her the truth," Bran said, voice rising. "Tell her why the Kesslers sent her to you, why she was hidden here." Rowan looked at all of them, then let out a long breath. His shoulders sagged. "They came to me years ago, said they needed a place to hide the girl. That someone was looking for her. Dangerous people, they said. I was desperate. After Morris died, I had debts, big ones. The Kesslers offered money. I didn't ask questions." "So you kept her here like property?" Clara said. "Like she wasn't a person?" "I protected her," Rowan shot back. "I gave her a safe place." "You stole her life," Clara cried. The girl Emmy looked between them, eyes wide, her world crumbling. "If all this is true, then who am I?" Clara stepped closer, slower now. "You're Ella Marin, my daughter. I never stopped looking for you." Emmy stared at her, eyes brimming with disbelief. Then, silently, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Rowan's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "I'm done living in someone else's lie," she said. "We're going to the police, all of us." Within 15 minutes, the wail of sirens echoed through the woods. Red and blue lights lit up the clearing. Officers stepped out, assessing the scene quickly. Bran explained everything. Clara handed over documents. Emmy gave her name, both the one she had grown up with and the one that had just been returned to her. Rowan was placed in handcuffs, not without resistance. Emmy watched in silence as the man she had called family was led away. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood beside Clara, breathing like someone who had been underwater too long and was only now breaking the surface. At the police station, they were separated for interviews. Statements were taken, photos reviewed. Clara was told DNA testing would be arranged immediately, but no one had doubts. Not anymore, not with the birthmark. Not with the photos, not with the tangled admissions from Rowan's own lips. And when Emmy finally sat down across from Clara in the station's waiting room, she looked at her, not with certainty, but with something else. Something searching. "I don't remember you," she said quietly. "I know," Clara replied, voice soft. "You were just a baby, but I remember everything about you." "Why did this happen?" Emmy asked. "Why would someone take me?" "Because people can be selfish," Clara said. "Because greed makes them blind, but you're here now, and that's what matters." Emmy hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know who I am yet." Clara took her hand. "Then we'll find out together." And in that fragile silence between two women, one searching for identity, the other mourning years lost, something new began. A beginning built not on lies, but on truth. And the long road to healing stretched out before them, quiet and waiting. Inside the sterile, gray-lit walls of the police station, beneath the hum of outdated ceiling lights and the quiet rustle of paperwork, the truth finally had a place to land. Clara sat at a narrow metal table, her hands folded tightly over a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the door with a mixture of fear and awe. Emmy was in the next room, giving her statement. The officers had been kind, respectful, especially once the pieces began falling into place. The photographs of baby Ella, the birthmark, the timeline, the farm connection, it all lined up. But what sealed everything beyond doubt was the preliminary DNA results, rushed through on emergency request due to the nature of the case. When the officer returned with the confirmation, Emmy Wells was biologically Ella Marin. Clara didn't cry, not at first. She simply nodded, as if her soul had known all along and had just been waiting for the world to catch up. The same couldn't be said for John and Miriam Kessler, who, under separate questioning, admitted to paying intermediaries nearly 2 decades ago to adopt a child they knew came from murky origins. They confessed to forging paperwork and severing ties with the outside world, claiming it was to protect Emmy. But what they had done was erase her, erase Ella, from her own life. They were charged with kidnapping, falsification of identity documents, obstruction of justice, and accessory to child trafficking. Rowan Pledger, though visibly shaken, chose cooperation. He admitted to his role, detailing the transactions and the people involved. With his help, the authorities hoped to dismantle one of the last remnants of a trafficking network that had preyed on the most vulnerable for years. In the quiet waiting area, Clara finally saw Emmy again. She walked in slowly, her shoulders squared but eyes tired. There was something unfamiliar in her walk, an adultness, a weight, but also something unmistakable in her gaze. A trace of the child Clara had once held close, soothed to sleep, whispered lullabies to on stormy nights. They sat down beside each other without speaking, the silence loaded with everything that had been taken from them. Birthdays missed, stories untold, milestones unshared. After a long pause, Emmy finally asked, "What was my father like?" Her voice wasn't angry or sad, just full of quiet longing. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a worn, creased photograph. It showed David holding baby Ella in one arm, the other wrapped around Clara, all of them laughing beneath the summer sun. "His name is David," she said. "He was strong, thoughtful. He called your birthmark a lotus star, said it made you look wise beyond your years." Emmy studied the photo for a long moment, her fingers brushing the edges. "I always felt like something didn't fit," she whispered. "Like I was standing in a place that should have felt like home, but didn't. I thought it was me, that I was just strange or distant, but now I get it." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I wasn't supposed to be there, I was stolen." Clara reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You weren't strange, you were strong. You survived something no one should have to survive." Emmy blinked rapidly, nodding, and for the first time her grip tightened in return. They sat like that until an officer entered and informed them that the processing of the Kesslers was complete. As they rose to leave, they passed through the hallway where John and Miriam were being led away in handcuffs. Emmy stopped. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked steady, direct, with the full force of someone reclaiming her power. John turned his eyes away in shame. Miriam tried to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea, but Emmy remained silent. That silence was louder than any words. Outside, the night had cooled. The stars overhead blinked against the dark, rural sky. As Clara and Emmy walked toward the car, Clara turned to her daughter and asked quietly, "Do you want a hug?" There was a long pause. Emmy seemed to weigh the question not just as an action, but as an invitation into a new reality. And then, slowly, she nodded. Clara opened her arms, unsure what to expect, but then Emmy stepped into them, folding herself tightly into her mother's embrace. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sobs, no theatrics, just warmth, human and whole, pressing through 18 years of separation. Clara closed her eyes, pressing her cheek into Emmy's hair, inhaling the scent of earth and wind and something like coming home. This wasn't just a hug, it was forgiveness, understanding, and the fragile beginnings of something new. Clara knew there would be questions, confusion, hard conversations. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had found her daughter. That against all odds, the universe had stitched back together what had once been so violently torn apart. And now, for the first time in almost 2 decades, they could begin again. Not as strangers, not as shadows, but as mother and daughter ready to build something true together. Clara sat frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the magazine like it was the edge of a cliff. Her breath shallow, her heart thundering inside her chest. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a strange, artificial glow over the glossy cover. Emmy Wells, 20 years old. The caption read, "The Forgotten Fields, a portrait series in rural Appalachia." But all Clara could see was the girl's eyes, her eyes, Ella's eyes. The resemblance was too precise. The sloping eyebrows, the delicate lips, the same unyielding gaze that used to pierce through Clara when Ella didn't want to eat her vegetables. And that mark, that unmistakable lavender lotus blooming just beside her left eye. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't imagination. It was her. Clara didn't remember walking out of the library. She only remembered the rush of wind as she crossed the parking lot, the magazine clenched to her chest, and the way her car keys trembled in her hand. Every moment felt like she was holding her breath through time itself, as if afraid that even breathing too loudly might cause this miracle to vanish. At home, she spread out every photograph she had ever taken of Ella. The baby album she kept tucked beneath her bed, the one David couldn't bear to look at. Clara laid out the pictures in a careful arc on her coffee table, placing the magazine beside them. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. She compared angles, measured cheekbones with her fingertips, closed one eye and squinted. Every bone in her body screamed the same truth: Ella was alive. Sleep didn't come that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, the image of Emmy's face burned into her memory like a holy vision. She thought of Morris, of the daycare, of the silence that had swallowed her whole since that day. She thought of how many times she had prayed, how many times she had screamed into her pillow until no sound came out. And now, after all these years, the universe had whispered back. The next morning, Clara was at the police station before it even opened. She waited in her car, clutching a to-go coffee cup that had long gone cold, eyes fixed on the front door. When Detective Gary Holden finally arrived, she was out of her car in an instant. He recognized her. Of course he did. She was the woman with the vanished child, the file that never closed. The mother who never stopped visiting the precinct on every birthday, every anniversary, like a ritual. As she slid the magazine across his desk, Gary didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached for his reading glasses. Together they sat in silence, a quiet thicker than grief. Then he said softly, "It could be her." Clara felt her throat tighten. A call to the Vogue editorial team led to a breakthrough. The photograph had been submitted by an amateur photographer, a student who had passed through Kessler Farm during a field project on rural sustainability. He had no idea the girl was anyone special. "She was just there," he said. Feeding goats didn't talk much, but that mark on her face. Yeah, that was unforgettable. The farm, Kessler Farm, Appalachia. Clara booked a bus ticket that afternoon. The ride was long, winding through hills and forgotten roads. Clara sat by the window, watching the trees blur into green smudges of memory. Her thoughts raced. Was Ella safe? Was she happy? Did she even remember her? Would she want to know the truth? The bus dropped her off in a town that barely had a name. She found a room at Pine Ridge Lodge, the only place with running water and a lock on the door. That night, she stared at the ceiling again. Only this time there was a flicker of something else in her chest. Not grief, not pain, hope. At Miller's Tavern, the local dive, Clara tried to blend in. She sat at the end of the bar, nursing a ginger ale. Her eyes scanned the room, faces, voices, tattoos, laughter. Then she heard the name, Morris. A young bartender named Bran had said it casually, talking to another local. Clara's heart stopped. She leaned in, asked softly, "Did you say your mother's name is Morris?" Bran nodded. "Yeah, strange name for a woman, I know. She passed away a few years ago." "And your father?" Clara's voice trembled. Rowan, he said, travels a lot. Coordinates work crews for farms, haven't seen him much lately. The world tilted, everything spun. Clara excused herself and rushed to the bathroom. Her hands gripped the sink. It was too much, too fast, but it wasn't over. She had come too far, she had waited too long. And now the pieces were beginning to fall into place. The image of Emmy's face wouldn't leave Clara's mind. It hovered, quiet and persistent, even in silence. The image of Emmy's face wouldn't leave Clara's mind. It hovered, quiet and persistent, even in silence. The image of Emmy's face wouldn't leave Clara's mind. Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the magazine, its glossy pages catching the late morning light filtering through the old courthouse windows. Her feet pounded against the sidewalk, her breath coming in short bursts as she rushed toward the Asheville Police Department. For 18 years she had walked these same streets, haunted by shadows and memories. But today felt different. Today she carried something real. When she burst through the station doors, Detective Gary Holden looked up from his desk. Time had added lines to his face, turned his hair more silver than not, but the moment he saw Clara, something in his expression softened. Recognition, pity, and then attention. She slammed the Vogue magazine onto his desk, flipping to the page, her voice cracked. "That's her," she whispered. "That's Ella." Gary leaned in, eyes narrowing as he studied the image of the young woman. He didn't need long. The resemblance was uncanny, and the birthmark, there it was like a whisper from the past, nestled just beneath her left eye like a faded memory. "Where was this taken?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp with urgency. Clara pointed to the caption at the bottom of the page. "Kessler Farm, Appalachia, Emmy Wells." The name tasted foreign in her mouth. Gary picked up the phone. A few hours later, after a flurry of calls, they learned that the photograph had been taken by a freelance artist who specialized in rural Americana. A shoot meant to capture forgotten beauty. Emmy Wells had wandered into frame while feeding goats, the photographer had said. It had been a spontaneous shot, a stroke of luck. "She wasn't supposed to be in the shoot," the photographer admitted. "But she had this look, you know." Clara knew the Kesslers, when contacted, were evasive. "She's not here anymore," they said. "Only stayed for a few weeks." They insisted she was just a farmhand, a transient, probably moved on to another town. But they had a name, Rowan, the man who coordinated temporary laborers. They gave a number. Gary called it. Disconnected. Clara stared at the lifeless phone screen like it might crack open with answers. She made a decision then, not to go home. Asheville held her grief, but it no longer held her purpose. That purpose had shifted, drawn now to the mountains of Appalachia and to the possibility that her daughter was still alive. She packed a small bag and drove through winding roads that seemed to hum with secrets, her heart pounding with every mile. The Pine Ridge Motel was a tired-looking place with peeling paint and floral curtains that hadn't been changed in a decade. Clara didn't care. She needed proximity. She needed answers. On her first night, she asked the desk clerk where locals tended to gather. "Miller's Tavern," he said, barely looking up. "Best chance you've got." The bar was dimly lit, its air heavy with smoke and stories. Locals hunched over beers, the hum of conversation rising and falling like a distant storm. Clara walked in, trying to make herself small. She sat at the far end of the counter and ordered a tea. The bartender, young, maybe mid-20s, had a gentle voice and easy smile. His name was Bran. They talked about nothing at first. The weather, the hills. The way spring seemed to take its time blooming out here. And then, because she had nothing to lose, Clara asked if he knew anyone named Rowan. The smile froze on Bran's lips. "That's my dad," he said slowly. "Why do you ask?" Clara's chest tightened. "And your mother?" she managed. "Morris," he said, then laughed. "Unusual, I know. She hates it." The world tilted. Clara gripped the edge of the bar, her knuckles white. Morris, the name she hadn't said aloud in years. The name of the man who stole her child. "She's not from around here, is she?" Clara asked carefully. Bran shook his head. "Nope, moved around a lot when I was a kid. We settled here when I was 10. My dad travels for work, fixes things. Finds jobs for people." He paused. "Wait, why do you want to know about them?" Clara stared at him, searching his face for malice, for recognition, for guilt. But there was nothing. Just a boy caught in something he didn't yet understand. "I think your mother took something from me," she said softly. Bran blinked. "What?" "My daughter," Clara said, barely above a whisper. He laughed nervously. "You're joking." "I wish I was." Bran's face drained of color. He stepped back. "Look, I think you've got the wrong Morris." But Clara didn't move. "Your father, Rowan, does he still find jobs for people at farms like Kessler?" Bran hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. Can you take me to him?" I don't know where he is right now. Find him, she said. Please. Bran looked torn, confused, but not cruel. He nodded slowly. I'll try. Clara spent the next day driving to Kessler Farm. The land stretched for miles, fences half fallen, cows grazing lazily, a rusted tractor abandoned like a ghost. She knocked on the farmhouse door. An older woman answered. Can I help you? Clara held up the magazine. I'm looking for her. The woman's eyes flickered. She worked here, yes, Emmy, quiet girl, good with animals. Do you know where she went? No idea, she left weeks ago. Did she say anything? Leave anything? The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. The farmhouse smelled of wood smoke and old flour. The woman, Miriam Kessler, poured Clara tea. Her husband, John, came in from the fields. He looked at the magazine and stiffened. That girl's trouble, he muttered. Why? Clara asked. She asked questions, Miriam said. About where she came from, about memories, said she remembered someone singing to her in French. We told her not to dwell on the past. Clara's throat closed, French lullabies, that had been their ritual, Clara and Ella, every night. Did you adopt her? Clara asked. Something like that, John said. Rowan brought her to us when she was little, said she needed a home. We paid for paperwork, didn't ask too many questions. Clara's voice cracked. She was kidnapped. Miriam's face paled. We didn't know, I swear. We just wanted a child. John stayed silent. Clara stood. If you hear from her. We won't, John cut in. She's gone. Clara drove back in silence. The mountains loomed around her, ancient and unmoved. That night Bran came to the motel. I found my dad, he said. He's in town tomorrow, he'll talk to you. Will he admit it? Clara asked. I don't know, Bran said, but I believe you now. I saw the picture. She does look like you. She is me, Clara whispered. She's mine. Bran looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. He handed Clara a scrap of paper, an address. He'll be there at noon. Bran didn't know. That much was clear from the moment his hands began to tremble as Clara told him everything. About the day her daughter vanished, about the name Morris, about the magazine cover that cracked open a silence 18 years deep. He had stood there, stunned, his breath shallow and face pale under the flickering motel lamp, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. My mother, he asked again, as though the word might change meaning if spoken aloud enough times. Clara didn't press. She saw the torment behind his eyes, the impossibility of reconciling the woman who had raised him with the truth that now clawed at the edges of his world. Still, when she asked him if he would help, he nodded. Not because he had processed it, not because he was ready, but because something in him, something instinctual, old and deep, knew that truth, however cruel, was better than the lie they'd all been living. The next day, Bran took Clara westward into the deeper folds of the Appalachians, where the roads narrowed and trees leaned close like they were listening. He didn't speak much, just pointed out a winding gravel path when they reached it. There's an old flower farm here, he said. My dad used to go there sometimes, said he was helping them manage labor. Whatever that meant. The car bounced along the uneven terrain, and with each bump, Clara's heart rose higher in her throat. Then through a clearing, she saw it. A wide field edged with weathered wooden fencing, patches of wildflowers swaying in the late afternoon breeze. And in the center, bathed in golden-purple light, stood a girl. Her back was turned. She wore a loose dress that danced around her knees, and her arms were outstretched as if she were trying to hold the sun in her palms. Clara's breath caught. Even before the girl turned, she knew the shape of her shoulders, the way her head tilted to the side, the quiet presence. She stepped from the car, legs shaking, and walked slowly toward the field. The girl turned, and the world stopped. The same wide-set eyes, the same full lips. And there at the corner of her left eye was the birthmark, soft purple, lotus-shaped. Clara nearly collapsed. Her knees buckled, and she had to grip the fence post to keep from falling. Emmy froze, her brow furrowed. She looked confused, wary. Clara stepped closer, whispering, Do you remember me? Emmy blinked. Should I? Her voice was soft, tinged with suspicion. Clara's heart splintered. I'm your mother, she said, her voice breaking. You were taken from me. 18 years ago. Emmy took a step back. That's not possible. My parents are John and Miriam. Clara fumbled into her bag, pulling out photographs. She handed them over with trembling fingers, images of a toddler smiling in a garden, being held by a man with dark hair and kind eyes. A tiny hand grasping a woman's thumb, a birthday cake with 2 candles. Emmy stared, her face shifted. Something flickered in her expression, curiosity, denial, and then something else. That's me, she whispered, pointing to the child. I know it is, but I don't remember this. You were only 2, Clara said gently. You wouldn't remember, but look, your eyes, the birthmark, you always called it your flower. Emmy's fingers hovered over the photo, like touching it might confirm or destroy it. Then Rowan emerged from the barn. He saw Clara, then Bran, and his entire body stiffened. "What are you doing here?" he barked. "You shouldn't be here." But Bran stepped forward, voice shaking with rage. "You lied to me, you lied about everything." Rowan's jaw clenched. "I protected you." "No," Bran said, "you protected yourself." Clara turned to him. "Tell her the truth, now." Rowan looked at Emmy, at the way she was clutching the photos to her chest. His shoulders slumped. For a long moment no one spoke. Then he sighed. "Morris, she was well. She took the child. I didn't know at first. When she got sick, she asked me to take care of her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't keep her. I owed the Kesslers money. They wanted a child, so I gave her to them." Emmy's face turned to stone. "You sold me." "I didn't know who she was," Rowan said quickly. "I didn't know she had a mother looking. I thought—" "You thought wrong," Clara cut in. "You thought like a coward." Emmy took a shaky step backward, her eyes welled with tears. "Everything I thought I knew was a lie." Rowan reached for her, but she recoiled. "Don't touch me." Bran walked between them. "We're calling the police." Rowan didn't resist. Maybe he'd known this day would come. Maybe in some twisted way he was relieved. Clara took Emmy's hand. It was cold, limp, but she didn't pull away. They sat on the porch together while sirens echoed faintly in the distance, winding through the hills. Clara didn't speak. She didn't push, she just held on. At the station, time moved differently. The walls buzzed with the weight of things long buried, clawing their way to the surface. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting the room in a sterile glow that made every tear feel like it didn't belong, but it did. Clara sat at the edge of the metal chair across from the detectives, holding her breath as the pieces began to fall into place. Her photos, her voice, her unshakable memory of a tiny lotus-shaped birthmark, all lined up with the department's revived DNA cross-matches and Emmy's records, which, once pried from the forged layers, revealed a painful truth. Emmy Wells was, in every sense, Ella Marin, her daughter, the girl who vanished, the girl who had cried for her in the night without knowing who she was crying for, the girl who had been stolen from the warm embrace of a mother and reshaped by people who'd bought her with stolen money and silent hands. John and Miriam Kessler, once upstanding proprietors of a peaceful farm in the Appalachians, were brought in with cuffs cold around their wrists and matching expressions of defiance wrapped in thin regret. They confessed without flair. John said, "We just wanted a child," as though those 6 words might bleach out the filth of what they'd done. Miriam avoided Emmy's gaze entirely. But when the detectives showed them the paper trail, the old bank transactions, the encrypted communication between Rowan and a shadowy channel that funneled undocumented children through rural networks, their silence became a cage they could no longer break free from. Rowan, for his part, did not resist arrest. Instead, he leaned into the interrogation room with a strange calmness, providing names, addresses, locations of storage units, names of other children who'd vanished the same year. He spoke like a man finally exhaling after decades of holding poison in his lungs. His cooperation cracked open a sprawling web, one that traced through small towns and obscure legal gaps, a trade of innocence for profit built on the assumption that people like Clara would simply move on. But Clara never did, and now, because she hadn't, it was over. Later that night, in a quiet holding room while paperwork churned and phones rang behind glass walls, Clara and Emmy sat together, alone for the first time. Not as mother and child from the photo, not as strangers divided by nearly 2 decades of lies, but as 2 people who had bled on opposite ends of a wound finally stitched. Emmy stared at her own hands, like she wasn't sure if they belonged to her anymore. Clara didn't press. Instead, she laid a small envelope on the table. Inside was a photo, old, slightly curled at the edges, of a man with laughing eyes and arms wrapped around a toddler who looked like sunshine made flesh. "This was your father," Clara said quietly. Emmy's fingers brushed the edge of the photo as though it might burn. "David," she whispered. Clara nodded. "He never stopped loving you, he just couldn't survive the not knowing." Emmy blinked hard. "I used to dream about him," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't know who he was, just a man, warm, kind, and a woman's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. I thought I was crazy." "You were never crazy," Clara said. "You were just lost." A long silence followed, not heavy but dense, healing, like roots untangling under dark soil, reaching for each other again. "I didn't know who I was," Emmy said finally. "I thought I was theirs. But something always felt Wrong. I never looked like them. I never felt safe, not really. I used to stare in the mirror and try to find myself, but I didn't know what I was looking for. She looked up at Clara. Now I see it. Clara's eyes brimmed. She didn't speak. She couldn't, not yet. When they stepped into the hallway to leave, John and Miriam were being escorted past. Clara instinctively placed herself between them and Emmy, but the girl, no, the woman, didn't flinch. She didn't turn away. Instead, she looked directly at the people who had raised her on a foundation of secrets, and she said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. She simply stared, and in that stare was every word they didn't deserve. John looked away first. Outside, the night air wrapped around them like a breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. It was cool, crisp, and strangely still. Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a scarf. "You're cold," she said, wrapping it gently around Emmy's shoulders. Emmy didn't respond right away. But as they walked toward the car, she stopped suddenly. Clara turned, and that's when she heard the question, soft, trembling, but firm. "Do you want to hug me?" Clara froze, her throat tightened. "Only if you want to," she whispered, and after a long pause, Emmy stepped forward. Their arms met awkwardly at first, hesitant, unsure. But then Emmy clung tighter, and Clara folded around her like the arms of time reversing, like the years between them cracked open to let them breathe the same truth. Clara felt her daughter's heartbeat against her chest, fast and terrified and so real. It wasn't just a hug, it was an unspoken promise, a shared ache. A piece of a soul returned. And in that fragile moment, lit by street lamps and the smell of cold pavement, the world did not fix itself. The years were not erased, but something new began. A beginning born not of fairy tales, but of truth, of wounds acknowledged, of darkness named, and of two women who, after all the silence and separation, had found each other again, not just in blood, but in choice.